Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thought she had the upper hand until Michelle Obama made the room kneel without saying a word. The courtroom buzzed with electricity, phones raised, cameras captured every breath. Then AOC stood, confident, commanding, every syllable sharpened to draw blood. Michelle Obama, your influence poisons every institution it touches. This nation deserves better, and today it gets justice. Applause broke out, real, swelling, raw. Smirks flickered on the panel. Even a few heads nodded. Michelle didn't flinch, didn't blink. She simply leaned forward, her eyes locked on AOC like a blade. No words, no rush, just a slow exhale and a faint, disarming smirk. Then she placed a worn folder marked HR 1209, unedited draft on the bench with eerie calm. Not a defense, a detonation. AOC's voice caught in her throat. The applause died mid-clap. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it. What was meant to crush Michelle Obama became the moment the crowd turned, and AOC's certainty began to sweat. Now press play and watch the downfall begin with a smirk. It began not with a verdict, but with a video. No sound. Just a flickering feed on the courtroom's central screen, broadcast on delay, played without warning. A glitch in the chain of control. Then the image appeared. Grainy, time-stamped, undeniable. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, late night, winter coat draped over her shoulders like a flag in surrender, stepping into a limousine marked with a private oil lobbyist's insignia. She wasn't alone. The door held open by a man whose name was etched into Senate ethics violations, whose money had buried climate bills for a decade. She shook his hand. She smiled. Gasps didn't echo. They drowned. The feed cut to black before the audio resumed. By then it didn't matter. Senator Booker stood. He didn't speak. He just stood, rigid, back height like a man absorbing a bullet through memory. Then he turned and walked out. One hand covered his mouth, the other balled into a fist so white his knuckles bled. Michelle didn't flinch. She had seen the footage days ago. She had waited. Now she stood, not in victory, but mourning. The betrayal had a face now, and it wore the colors of the movement she had helped build from broken bones and borrowed time. AOC didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just stood there, eyes hollow, as if she were watching someone else's life be autopsied in front of the nation. Her shoulders rose once, then stilled. She didn't even blink when the crowd outside started screaming again. This time not chance, but raw animal rage. Something had ruptured. Not a scandal, a covenant. The courtroom was no longer a room. It was a crucible. Phones buzzed. Reporters whispered into handheld mics, and clerks scrambled to maintain order that no longer existed. One judge slammed a gavel so hard the head cracked. No one noticed. The law had lost its grip. The second truth went viral. Screens lit up with hashtags. Number red dress lie, number legacy on trial, number justice for the movement. On one bench, a protester disguised as a paralegal dropped a stack of handwritten letters onto the floor. Notes from climate organizers who'd been jailed or disappeared in overseas sweeps funded by companies AOC once condemned. Their names whispered across the polished oak like ghosts finally called to testify. Michelle finally moved. One step forward. The lights caught the fine stitching on her suit. A subtle tribute to Shirley Chisholm, invisible to most, but unmistakable to those who still remembered what justice once looked like. Her voice didn't need to rise. The silence bent to it. We believed in a future, she said. We didn't ask for perfection, but we demanded alignment. You gave us something else. AOC said nothing. Her eyes, rimmed in unslept grief, flicked toward the screen as the footage replayed in silence behind Michelle's back. Her own face frozen in that moment of compromise. That smile, the one that had once sparked movements, now haunting like a closing door. Then the scream came, from outside, from deep in the crowd. A woman, young, furious, familiar, hoarse from hours of shouting. Why did you sell us out? The courtroom didn't react as one. It fractured. Some wept. Some nodded, slow and cold. Others looked to the floor as if truth were something shameful to step over. Senator Warren stood next. Her eyes were bloodshot. She didn't speak either. She placed a small slip of paper, a resignation letter, on the corner of the prosecutor's table and walked out without a word. Something inside Michelle cracked then. Not visible, but real. You could see it in the way her hand gripped the edge of the podium. Not for balance, for restraint. The judge leaned forward, voice sharp. Do you wish to enter your defense? AOC turned her head for the first time. Her voice was low, barely human. No excuse. Just the truth, finally carried without disguise. A surrender, not to guilt, but to reality. She knew what she had done, and she knew that knowing was the only thing she had left. Outside, a chant began again, but this time it was fractured. Two voices, two rhythms, one demanding punishment, the other begging for understanding. Inside, silence fell again, this time permanent. A silence that didn't signal peace, but the end of something too broken to name, and no one dared look away. Before the courtroom imploded, before resignation letters fluttered like echo onto marble floors, before AOC's silence became louder than any defense, there were three figures circling each other in the halls of ambition, each one dragging behind them the wreckage of their own righteous contradictions. The first was Michelle. She had once believed in order, not the brittle bureaucratic kind passed down from faceless committees, but an order forged through empathy, legacy, and controlled fueled fire. She was never naive, but she had hope. That was her original sin. Hope. In her prime, she was the architect of quiet resistance. Speeches that didn't raise their voice, but still drew blood. Legislation drafted in candlelight while her daughter slept. She had believed in the long game, in preserving institutions, even while knowing they had once been built to crush people like her. Her flaw wasn't ignorance, it was endurance. She had stayed too long in rooms that smelled of polished wood and old lies, believing she could reshape them from the inside. And that's how she met the second match holder, Alexandria. She didn't walk into the halls of power, she tore through them. Youth braided into defiance, fire in her eyes, wind at her back. When they first sat together, backstage during a closed-door session on climate equity, AOC was still raw, still electric. Michelle had seen it in her immediately, the same rage she'd once swallowed behind practiced smiles. But unlike Michelle, Alexandria didn't mute herself. She was chaos in lipstick and heels, truth at the volume of a scream. And Michelle admired her for it. For a time, they were something close to family. Late-night calls, whispered strategies, a shared dream not of power, but of a world that didn't kill its children with bureaucracy and floodwater. AOC had called her Shell. Michelle had called her Thunder. They had whispered these names during debates. Coded praise passed like sacred notes in an orchestra they were trying to burn and conduct at the same time. But fire doesn't stay tamed, especially not hers. And behind them, both silent and slow, walked the third. He didn't care for names or causes. Jamal Reyes had been a fixer long before he had a title. He never gave speeches. He carried documents, contracts, secrets, recordings. No one quite knew where he came from, but everyone understood his purpose: survival. He moved between rooms like a shadow built from silence. Michelle used him once, during the early healthcare fights. AOC used him twice to trace dark money leaks during the Green New Deal collapse. But neither woman ever fully understood that Jamal didn't switch sides. He was the side no one wanted to admit existed, the connective tissue of a decaying empire. He had the receipts before anyone else. He had seen the limo meeting weeks before the video leaked. He had sat on it, knowing exactly when to move. And it wasn't bitterness. It wasn't even strategy. It was math. When ideals rot, those who worship them must be broken first. Jamal believed in nothing but equilibrium. He once told AOC, back when they still shared cigarettes between hearings, that power only survives when it learns to lose occasionally. You want to win too hard, too fast. That's how you get eaten. She laughed at him then. We didn't come here to survive. He smiled. You did. That conversation returned to her the moment the screen flickered with the damning video. The moment Thunder became target, and somewhere in that vast courtroom, behind a journalist's shoulder or a broken teleprompter, Jamal was watching. Not with malice, just confirmation. Michelle remembered him too. She remembered how he stood outside her office the day after Sandy Hook, holding a folder thick with vote predictions and donor threats. This isn't the moment, he said. You can't afford to break rank now. She had hated him then, hated how right he was, and hated more that she'd listened. Now all three stood on the same burning stage, one clinging to memory, one to silence, and one to the ashes they had all helped create. But this wasn't a clean unraveling. Their pasts bled through. Michelle had fought her first campaign with a shredded voice and a chest cold that nearly hospitalized her. The night she lost that local race, Barack had held her hand and said, "You're too honest for this game." She had proved him wrong.
AOC had grown up with mold in her Bronx apartment ceiling and rage in her throat. Her father's death had carved her into a woman who didn't mourn. She mobilized, but grief stayed. It showed in the way her voice broke when she spoke of home, or how she flinched at the sound of thunder even in summer. She had used hope as a shield, and when it cracked, it cut deep. Jamal, his flaw was physical, a limp from a protest gone wrong, battened to the knee during the Ferguson riots. He never spoke of it, but his walk betrayed him. Every step reminded him that loyalty gets you limping, while betrayal gets you paid. Their war didn't start in the courtroom. It started in the small things. The vote Alexandria changed at the last minute to appease a moderate donor. The memo Michelle buried after being told its release would tank an upcoming election. The deal Jamal brokered between opposing wings of the party that saved the budget, but sold out 500,000 public housing residents in the process. None of them could say when they stopped trusting each other, but they remembered the moment they realized they'd have to choose between the mission and each other. The night before the trial, Michelle had walked the length of her old campaign office. The walls still bore the photos of rallies, marches, tear-streaked embraces. She looked at the faces, not just hers, but the ones she'd helped lift, and wondered if any of them would still recognize her now. That same night, AOC had sat alone in a corner of Union Station, anonymous beneath a hoodie, watching commuters rush past. She held the burner phone Jamal once gave her, for emergencies only. She almost called him, not to ask for help, just to say one word, why, but she didn't. And Jamal, he watched the feeds, the predictions, the trends. He moved money, sent one encrypted text to a contact in Arizona. It's time, released the second file. Then he stood up, adjusted the knee brace under his slacks, and walked out into a night that didn't care what side he'd chosen, because his side was survival. They had once been a constellation, different stars orbiting a shared purpose. Now they were debris from a collapsed sun, drifting, burning, colliding. Michelle held the match that morning, but it had been passed to her by trembling hands. AOC had once sworn she would never compromise. compromise. But compromise doesn't always come in bills or votes. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the meetings you don't skip, in the names you don't name. And Jamal, he had never lit a fire in his life. He just made sure everyone else ran out of water. They each stood now in the courtroom of a dying republic, wearing their own guilt like medals they couldn't return. Not heroes, not villains, just humans, rotten from proximity to too much power, too much purpose, too much history, still breathing, still breaking. The people who held the match didn't ignite the blaze, but they stood there, watched it spread, and none of them reached for the extinguisher. The folder didn't scream, it didn't bleed, it didn't even bear a title, just a red string binding its edges and the faintest fingerprint smudge near the corner, like someone had hesitated, then handed it off anyway. It was Thursday. The clock on the marble wall read 9:13 a.m. The hearing hadn't even started, and yet the moment that document slid across the lacquered oak desk of the Judiciary Committee chair, the air inside the chamber fractured. Michelle was the only one who saw it land. A quiet shuffle from a junior aide, nervous, underdressed, eyes darting toward the exits, the kind of political courier no one remembered seeing afterward. She picked it up without comment, out of habit, more than curiosity. At first it looked like a procedural summary, travel logs, legislative emails, blacked out names in predictable places, but then came the photo. A grainy, zoomed-in capture from a security camera dated 2 weeks prior. AOC, head down, in the corner of a midnight-lit parking garage, handing off a manila envelope to someone marked only as Consultant X. Michelle didn't react, not visibly. Her eyes scanned the next page. A transcription, partial but damning. Words attributed to AOC. Let it leak. The deal's already rotting. If she finds out, it dies on the floor. Better it dies in flames. Michelle blinked once. The microphone at her station was still muted. She flipped the page again. Handwritten notes, financial transfers. The document was a death knell wrapped in silence. Not proof of criminality. Something worse. Betrayal dressed as strategy. And then, the moment it all cracked open, the chair of the hearing, in a voice slightly too loud for the room, said, "We'd like to welcome Representative Ocasio-Cortez to testify regarding her oversight role in the Justice Committee's ethics reforms." But the mic wasn't cut when he leaned in to whisper to his assistant, "Why the hell is she still walking into this room?" The audio spilled across the chamber speakers. It was dread. No one moved. AOC, already halfway to the bench, stopped mid-step. The entire room turned to her. Michelle's fingers froze above the folder. Her thumb pressed down hard enough to crease the corner. The cameras, already streaming to 3 million viewers across platforms, didn't cut away. They lingered. They panned slowly from the chairman's sweat-slicked forehead to Alexandria's stunned face, to Michelle's impassive silence. And somewhere in that electric, airless pause, everyone in the room felt it. Something ancient had just shifted. Not an error, not even a revelation, but a severing. The trial hadn't started, but the war had. AOC didn't speak. She turned slowly, too slowly, and sat. Michelle looked down at the folder again. Something inside her wanted to slide it across the desk, to hold it up to the light, but something deeper told her this was not her decision to make. Not anymore. This was destiny's move, and destiny had a twisted sense of timing. Then came the second spark. Small, quiet, more like the tremble before an earthquake than the quake itself. 2 aides walked out, not in protest, not in panic, in shame. One had worked with Michelle during the Chicago Education Accords. The other was Alexandria's campaign lead in 2022. Neither looked at their former bosses. They just stood and exited as if leaving a wake, and that was the moment Michelle realized this wasn't political anymore. It was personal. The screen in the corner of the courtroom, meant to display legislative exhibits, glitched once, then switched without prompting to an open file window. The public was watching it all. The transcript, the photo, the quote. Alexandria's face drained of color. Her voice, when it came, was low and hoarse. That's not the full context. No one answered her. No one needed to. The crowd outside the building, already dense from protests about a pending housing bill, started murmuring. Phones were raised, screens refreshed. By the time the courtroom guards stepped forward to intervene, hashtags had already begun trending. Thunderfall or burn the oath, shelves AOC. Inside, the silence curdled into something uglier. Michelle stood, not to speak, but to leave. Her hands trembled. She placed the folder face down on the bench. Then she walked out, heels sharp against marble, without a word. Alexandria watched her go, unable to breathe through the crushing weight of eyes and memory. She had meant to force change. She had meant to outmaneuver corruption. She hadn't meant for this, but intent doesn't survive collision with truth. And in the hallway, Michelle stopped, back against the wall, finally allowing her breath to hitch. She didn't cry, but her nails dug into her palm hard enough to draw blood. Across town, Jamal sat at a cafe table, watching it unfold on 4 screens at once. He sipped his espresso. His phone buzzed once. Ready for part 2? He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because the fire was already lit, and everyone who had held the match was now warming their hands beside it, or running for water. This wasn't about what was said. It was about what wasn't denied. In a single breath, the entire architecture of loyalty collapsed, and no one moved to stop it. That night, Michelle's staff found her sitting alone in her office, lights off, a glass of untouched scotch on the table. She stared at a photo from her husband's first inauguration. AOC stood in the corner of that image, 23 years old, grinning, clapping, eyes full of belief. Michelle didn't turn the photo down, but she did close the folder once and for all. Somewhere in the quiet aftermath, Alexandria recorded a message, not a denial, not an admission, just a question. How much truth are you willing to burn your heroes over? She never posted it. She deleted it before even playing it back. back, but Jamal already had a copy because some fires don't need gasoline. Just a stare too long in the hallway, a folder left on the wrong desk, a microphone left on 1 second too long, and in that second, history pivoted, not cleanly, not loudly, but irrevocably. What would you have done? Kept the folder closed, spoken anyway, or walked out before the walls caught flame because they were always going to burn? The only question left was, who lit the first match and who let it fall? It was a Tuesday when the leak dropped, not with fireworks, but a whisper, a single tweet from an unverified account, 4 screenshots, 1 voice memo, and in less than 12 minutes, it detonated every private alliance in Washington, like a string of landmines buried in familiar soil. The first screenshot, an internal email chain dated 2 months before the ethics hearing. The subject line, alternate pathways, if MO stalls. The body of the message was worse. AOC replying to 2 senior advisors and an unnamed third recipient. We use the school board petition as moral leverage. If she breaks rank, the vote dies with her. Michelle's initials in the margin, circled in red. The second image, a Google Doc titled Fracture Plan V3. It read like a coup, but softer. Legal maneuvering disguised as concern for judicial accountability, ethics reformation, generational transition. At the bottom, a watermark, JR 2025, Jamal. The voice memo was worse. 78 seconds of what sounded like Alexandria in a closed-door prep session. Her voice low, tired, guarded, but clear. She still thinks I want her blessing. I don't. I want her silence. Michelle is the last symbol they trust. If she speaks, we lose the base. If she blinks, we win everything. Michelle watched it unfold on a cracked iPad, alone in the basement of the Carter Center. She hadn't slept in 3 nights. The words didn't surprise her, but the tone did. The coldness, the calculation. It wasn't ambition anymore. It was a survival strategy, one she herself had used years ago. She recognized it like a scar in someone else's mirror, but recognition didn't soften it. It sharpened it. By midday, reporters had cornered Alexandria outside a community clinic in Queens. She wore no makeup. Her hands shook as she adjusted the mic. That recording was taken without consent, and it lacks, but she didn't finish, because behind her, one of her own aides, Talia, the one with the red streak in her hair and a tattoo of Dolores Huerta on her shoulder, stood stone still, holding a copy of her private diary, now circulating online. Pages were highlighted, yellow, red, blue. I warned her. She's becoming the very icon she swore she'd tear down. She drinks legacy like wine now. If Michelle doesn't move, we make her irrelevant. It's the only way. Someone shouted, "Is it yours?" Talia didn't answer. She dropped the diary on the steps and walked away. And still, that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came from the one person no one had counted on, Valerie, Michelle's old chief of staff, silent for months, rumored to have distanced herself from everything after the 2023 midterms. She emerged with one document, signed, scanned, timestamped, a joint strategy memorandum between the Obama Institute and Justice Reimagined, AOC's ethics pact, dated 6 months before the rupture. In it, both women agreed to coordinate public messaging in exchange for legislative backing. There was even a line about coordinated press outreach to stage visual contrast without actual dissent. In other words, planned opposition, stage tension. The people had been played. Michelle stared at the signature, her own initials, and her stomach turned. She remembered the meeting. It was supposed to be symbolic, a gesture of unity. We can't fight if we look divided, Alexandria had said. Optics first, then substance. Michelle hadn't disagreed, but she hadn't remembered signing this. The signature had been auto-filled, a default digital approval, a procedural nothing. But in the eyes of the public, it was collusion. By nightfall, protests had begun. Not against Michelle, not against Alexandria, against both. Placards read, "Power dresses like progress now. Icons are still shields. We wanted change. We got theater." The most haunting one, a child's handwriting on a sign taped to the courthouse fence. "Mom said heroes lie." Inside her Georgetown townhouse, Michelle sat in silence, scrolling through footage she hadn't seen in years. Alexandria, age 26, giving a fiery floor speech about decency and debt relief. The camera caught Michelle in the background, clapping. There had been a moment, just one, when she believed this girl might be better than the machine. She wasn't, but neither had Michelle been, because in another leak, buried in the flood, someone found a security clearance log from 2 years back. Michelle had visited a private intelligence group, Parallax, known for internal opposition research. The memo listed possible future ethical vulnerabilities AOC, with a bullet point list beneath it. Alexandria had never known, and now she did. Jamal, watching it unfold from a penthouse window, said nothing. He simply forwarded the last document to every major newsroom, a signed check, dated 3 weeks before the first hearing, drawn from an offshore account linked to a PAC both women had publicly denounced, made out to Kay Fisher, the former legislative liaison for the House Judiciary Committee. His job? To set hearing dates, to delay subpoenas, to make problems disappear. The check bore one signature, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The caption under the leak read, "There are no outsiders in this war, just masks." Michelle threw her phone against the wall. The screen shattered. The next morning, she got a call. Unknown number. She picked up anyway. The voice was soft, male, familiar. "You left the door open. Just listen to the dial tone," when he hung up. Later that week, Alexandria stood at the back of a protest vigil. She didn't speak, didn't wave, but one woman recognized her, approached, whispered something no microphone could catch. A single tear slid down Alexandria's face. She nodded, and then walked away into the cold. Because the truth was out now. Not just truth, shards. Shards that cut everyone who ever touched them. Michelle had tried to be the wall. Alexandria had tried to be the fire. But the storm had always come from inside, and it was too late to take shelter now. Who had played whom? Who had loved whom? Who had betrayed whom? The answer, always, was yes. And if you think you'd have done better, tell me, how many lies would you tell to protect a future that didn't want you in it? How many truths would you kill just to stay standing? Because that's all anyone was doing now. Standing, bleeding, remembering, and waiting for the next match to fall. Under the Capitol dome, where centuries of law had been shaped and undone, the air had changed. No one needed to say it. You could taste it in the silence. Thick, metallic, sour. Outside, barricades shivered under the weight of bodies pressed against them. Protesters with handmade signs, some blistered by sun, some bleeding from conflict, howled for verdicts, for vengeance, for clarity no court could give. Michelle Obama stepped through the East Wing entrance, her heels echoing like gavel strikes. But there was no ceremony left. The metal detector lights had been turned off. The guard at the post refused eye contact. She passed through unchallenged. There was nothing more to secure. Across the city, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was sitting motionless, watching a screen that kept refreshing. Each new video was worse than the last. Her name trended beside fire emojis, edited court clips, and one harrowing freeze frame of her stepping down from the stand, lips parted, eyes wide, not in guilt, but in realization. Someone had set her up to fall, and now that someone had vanished, the broadcast that changed everything wasn't even official. It was a leaked feed, raw courtroom footage patched through a whistleblower's cracked phone and streamed straight to the public. The camera was slightly off-center, showing Michelle turning not to the bench, but to the gallery. She wasn't answering a question. She was delivering something closer to a eulogy, words she never intended for the world, only for the woman watching from the third row. "You looked me in the eyes and said we'd protect each other," Michelle said, voice dry but steady. "But you already had the matches in your hand." The clip caught, repeated, warped, and outside the courthouse the storm began. At first it was confined to the steps, a few dozen voices chanting two names like dueling hymns. Michelle, Alexandria. Then came the signs, the speakers, the drones dropping flyers, the banners projected onto buildings. Truth is a casualty. Mothers betray daughters. Who gets to burn? By nightfall, the protests had spread from D.C. to New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Bridges shut down. Subways stalled. A senator was punched on live television. A Supreme Court clerk was found unconscious in a bathroom stall with a printed copy of the leaked email. Michelle's red ink annotations circled in trembling hands. Judges issued temporary statements, then went silent. One by one, district courts began postponing hearings. The language shifted from civil unrest to legal siege. Reporters began refusing live assignments outside government buildings. On cable news, a former attorney general admitted he couldn't guarantee the continuity of legal legitimacy in its current form. And in the middle of it all, AOC vanished. For 3 days, she was unseen. No tweets, no press, no aides answering calls. The public fed on rumors. She had fled the country. She had entered witness protection. She had been detained. Then, without warning, she resurfaced, standing alone outside a shuttered federal building in the Bronx. Her coat was wrinkled, face bare. She stepped forward, looked directly into the cameras, and said nothing. Just raised her hand, slow, deliberate, and then let it fall. That silence hit harder than any confession. Some saw surrender, others saw defiance. But what no one could deny was that the tide shifted that day. The public fractured not into left and right, but into those who believed in a system worth saving, and those who saw only rot beneath the marble. Michelle's next appearance came via satellite, a tightly controlled CNN special. The background was neutral, her tone clinical, but the impact was electric. She did not backtrack. She did not apologize. She named names. She revealed memos. She pointed directly at AOC and said, "She wasn't the spark." Federal buildings were spray-painted with the names of the accused and the betrayed. Anonymous jurors resigned in droves. A military official posted a single statement to Instagram, "We are watching closely." Then came the crowds. Like waves, they crashed and retreated but never disappeared. Armed protesters in tactical gear appeared at state capitals, demanding transparency. Counter-demonstrators threw paint at their vests. Hospital ERs reported spikes in panic attacks, cardiac arrests, and attempted suicides. Ordinary citizens crumbling under the weight of moral vertigo. Someone tried to bomb the D.C. courthouse. The device didn't detonate, but the message was received. Michelle stopped making public statements. The last footage of her showed her in a small car, flanked by federal marshals, face turned toward the window. Her lips moved. No one could hear what she said. A lip reader on TikTok claimed she whispered, "It's too late." AOC returned to the Capitol for one final address. What some called her farewell, others her judgment day. She walked past colleagues who wouldn't meet her eyes, past staffers who once screamed her name at rallies now barely breathed in her presence. She took the podium alone. "I believed in the fire," she said. "I didn't expect it to eat the architects." There were no cheers, no boos, just silence. And still the country burned. Courthouses boarded their windows. Federal judges held virtual hearings from undisclosed locations. Several governors proposed states of emergency, only to be blocked by their own legislatures. The DOJ opened a formal investigation into the entire legal chain of command. Some say this was justice. Others call it annihilation. But either way, the institutions that once claimed to hold America together had been stripped bare. What remained was fury and grief. And the question none dared ask aloud, if this is what truth looks like, like? What have we been worshipping all this time? Now they watched their screens in fear, waiting for the next name to fall. Because if Michelle could turn on Alexandria, who was safe? Who was left? And what, if anything, did the fire leave untouched? They thought it would end with an apology, a statement, a withdrawal, a resignation wrapped in polite regret and national unity. But this was no longer a conflict that could be solved with language. It was a reckoning dressed in legal robes and human nerves, and it had waited too long to stay quiet. The courtroom was not full. The public had stopped showing up, afraid of more bomb threats, or perhaps simply too exhausted to witness the unraveling of one more pillar. Cameras remained. The feed still ran, and in one final twist of bitter irony, the most watched trial of the decade played out in near silence. Michelle sat alone at the long defense table. No aides, no notes. A bottle of water, untouched, her hands folded, not in prayer but resolve. Across from her sat the woman who had once shared campaign buses and late-night war rooms with her, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. No makeup, no pretense, just a face hollowed out by weeks of accusations and silence. The judge entered. No one rose. Then came the voice, not from the bench, from the back. It was Rashida Tlaib, once a friend to them both, once a firewall in the house during the worst days of the leaks. She stood holding a small paper, her voice shaking but louder than any gavel. I submit for the record the resignation of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, effective immediately. The room didn't gasp. It inhaled grief. Alexandria did not move, did not blink, but behind her, one aide turned and sprinted out of the courtroom, tears streaming. The sound of her sobs filled the air like church bells. Michelle turned her head slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't nod, but she watched, all the way until Rashida lowered the letter. Then the judge began. In light of new evidence submitted and cross-examined before this court, this institution finds that former First Lady Michelle Obama acted within the bounds of investigatory authority, albeit through means that he paused, choked, then continued. That cannot be ethically endorsed. However, due to the absence of legal precedent and the obstruction of federal channels, we have no basis to pursue charges. It was a legal acquittal, but it felt like a public execution. The cameras cut to Alexandria. She stood, finally. Her knees shook, her hands clenched, and she said not to the court, but to Michelle, "You used me." Michelle did not look away. "So did you," she said, quiet, unapologetic. From the gallery, Rashida stepped forward again. "That's enough, all of you. We've already lost too much." But the real moment, the final shattering, came not in words, but from a screen. A young staffer, nervous and pale, approached the judge. She handed him a phone. He looked at it, then passed it to a clerk, then to another. A recording, until it reached the room fell into slow, strangled silence. A voice crackled through the speakers, old, familiar. It was Barack Obama. "If she ever turns, pull everything. The courts, the press. Make her irrelevant. I don't care how. Just make her vanish." The words weren't directed at Michelle. They were about Alexandria. And Michelle was in the room when he said them. Her face didn't change. Not a flinch, not a twitch, but her fingers curled around the phone like a noose. Alexandria stared, then laughed. A jagged, bitter sound that echoed too long. So that was the game, from the start. Michelle stood up. "Number, that was the cost. You wanted to burn the system and thought it would never burn you back." She walked out, just like that. No final ruling, no press statement, no handshakes or breakdowns. But outside, the city was waiting. She stepped into sunlight and was nearly knocked over by the crush of protesters. Some screamed, some reached out, some just watched, eyes hollowed by too much truth. She kept walking, past the microphones, past the barricades, past the portrait of herself that someone had defaced with red spray paint. Inside, Alexandria collapsed, literally. Her legs gave out. Rashida caught her, but she didn't speak. She had nothing left to say. The screen inside the courtroom showed one last clip before it went dark. An aerial view of the Capitol lawn. The words spelled in white bedsheets. What did we build? What did we break? No answers came. Only the echo of power being emptied from one vessel to another. And somewhere far from D.C., a child watched the news and asked their mother, why did they fight? The mother looked away, because even now, no one really knew. And that was the final strike. The marble floors of the Capitol were still sticky with blood and soda, an unholy blend of spilled humanity and American indulgence. No one moved to clean it at first. It was as if everyone waited for someone else to declare the tragedy over, for the camera lights to cool, for the bodies, metaphorical and otherwise, to stop twitching. But the silence kept stretching, and silence, left too long, begins to rot. Michelle Obama's shoes were never found. Only the heel, shattered near the podium where the final ruling had been delivered, lay on its side like a monument to what could never be rebuilt. The courtroom was cordoned off with yellow tape that fluttered in the wind like forgotten streamers after a funeral parade. Outside, protesters and pilgrims merged into the same faceless mass. Some wept, some screamed, and most simply stared, as if waiting for instructions that would never come. AOC had vanished. Her office was emptied in 27 minutes flat, aides moving in near silence, careful not to make eye contact with the walls still painted with her promises. Someone had scrawled "liar" across her campaign poster with a child's marker. Another left a note behind the clock. You didn't deserve this, but you didn't stop it either. Across the street, statues were being shrouded in thick black canvas. Washington, Lincoln, even the obscure figures, long dead judges, local heroes, were rendered faceless by fabric. Tourists came anyway. They posed for photos in front of the blank forms, smiles strained, unsure whether they were mocking history or mourning it. Somewhere, a boy asked his father who Michelle Obama used to be, and the man didn't answer. At night, old clips clips resurfaced like ghosts. Michelle during her 2016 convention speech. AOC weeping at a detention facility fence. Their faces, once symbols of conviction, now felt like masks peeled back to reveal something colder beneath. Cable news refused to air the full courtroom footage. Too raw, they said, too unresolved. The networks opted for panels of well-groomed experts parsing the ethics of betrayal, their language clinical, their eyes empty. But the footage leaked anyway. It spread like infection. On subway walls, college dorms, rural church basements. The moment the gavel fell, the look in Michelle's eyes as she realized she had been used, the crack in AOC's voice when she whispered, "I didn't know." The way the crowd, once so sure, began to pull apart in real time, like muscle tearing from bone. No one agreed on what had happened, only that something had ended. On the Hill, a new law passed in near total silence. It restructured oversight, criminalized selective disclosure, and tightened media accountability under a rubric too complex for the public to digest. The president signed it behind a closed door. No cameras, no pen passed to an aide, just a thud as paper met desk. Reporters called it a ghost law. Citizens simply ignored it. In Michigan, a teacher ripped pages out of a civics textbook. In Florida, a teenager got suspended for quoting the trial during a debate. In California, a billboard appeared overnight. Truth isn't treason. Silence isn't safety.
Some of Michelle's former
It was
allies
taken
held
down
vigils.
within the hour.
Others deleted every post they'd ever made with her name. A senator was heard whispering in the hallway, "It should have been me," before vomiting into a trash can outside the women's bathroom. The janitor kept mopping. The cameras never stopped rolling. No graves were dug, no charges were filed, no apologies issued. A nation allergic to reflection stumbled forward, blinded by its need to move on. A little girl in Queens asked her mother why the news called AOC a traitor. The mother just said, "Go to sleep." Somewhere beneath concrete and shame, the truth was still buried. Not hidden, just unattended. No one dared to dig, and somewhere else a hand folded a copy of the verdict, slid it into a drawer and locked it. Not because it had to be hidden, but because it no longer mattered. The end had come with no anthem, no explosion, no final speech. Just the dull echo of footsteps down marble halls, and the question that no one dared speak aloud. What if we were never right at all? There's a drawer somewhere in your home, or maybe it's a folder on your screen, where you keep the things you're not ready to name. Not lies, not quite, just stories you tell yourself in softer tones, with the corners smoothed out. Stories where your side tried its best, where silence was strategy, where the paper didn't mean what it said. You watched Michelle stand alone. You saw AOC look away. You heard the verdict, even if the microphones failed. And still, some part of you wanted to believe it was all fixable. That betrayal, once revealed, could be forgiven. That if you were in the room, you would have done better, spoke louder, stood firmer, told the truth. But here's the thing. You were in the room, not that one, but in every room since. Scrolling, watching, forwarding the clip, laughing nervously at the memes, choosing not to ask your friend what they really meant when they said she had it coming, holding back your questions because they might ruin the dinner. So now the question isn't about Michelle or AOC or even the court. It's you. Would you have signed the paper? Would you have walked out mid-oath? Would you have said their name when the mic went live? And if the answer is no, if the truth burned through the people you trusted, then what do you believe in now? Because the heroes are gone, the institutions are bleeding, and the silence you're sitting in, it's not neutral, it's waiting. So ask yourself before the next gavel drops, who would you protect if no one's watching?